Ani and good day. My name is Adele Loosemore and I'm a Treaty Indian from Shiponining. In this video, I'm going to look at electors lists. They're exactly what they sound like, the names and addresses of eligible voters in a particular area. The 1935 lists were created specifically for voting in the federal election. Before that time, the government relied on municipal voters lists. The Canadian census is taken once every 10 years, and the 1931 census is not available to the public yet. So electors lists are very handy for finding out which families lived in particular areas. In the 1935 federal election, the main leaders in the running were William Lyon Mackenzie King of the Liberal Party, Prime Minister R.B. Bennett of the Conservative Party, and William Aberhart of the Social Credit Party. King won a majority government. The biggest issue in the election was the economy. Canada was still in the midst of the Great Depression. Most First Nations people were not allowed to vote in federal elections unless they gave up their legal rights as Indians. This photo, taken about 1916, shows a group of Aboriginal soldiers in the uniform of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, with elders and an Indian Affairs official. During the First and Second World Wars, First Nations people who joined the military gained the right to vote without having to give up their legal status as Indians. But after the wars ended, those veterans who lived on reserve lost the voting rights they had gained during their military service. In 1960, government decided that all First Nations people living on or off reserve would be allowed to vote in federal elections. This picture was taken to mark a historic moment. The note on the back of the original photo says these are people of the Rice Lake First Nation near Peterborough. Theirs was the first community of First Nations people living on reserve to vote in a federal election. In this case, a by-election on October 31st, 1960. They are in the Hiawatha Council Hall. From left to right are Lawrence Salaby putting his ballot in the box, Chief Ralph Laux, Deputy Returning Officer, Lucy Musgrave, Poll Clerk, and Eldon Muskrat, Poll Constable. On the table is a bust of Chief Tecumseh. Now let's look at the 1935 list for Collins Inlet, a village in the electoral district of Algoma East, Rural Polling Division number 34. I drew the boundaries of that polling division on a map. Killarney Village is on the left side of the map, marked with a red dot. Collins Inlet Village, marked with a blue dot, was in Carlisle Township. Humboldt Township was on the east side of Carlisle. The west, north, and east boundaries of the Point Grandin Indian Reserve are in Humboldt Township. The reserve extends north and south of the green dot that I added to the map. The dark blue lines show the approximate area that the 1935 list of electors covers. Collins Inlet Village is directly across the water from Philip Edward Island. This little community grew as a result of the logging industry. A lumber mill was built on the nearby Beaverstone River in the 1850s. The operations were moved to the Mazenazing River in the early 1860s. Here's the 1933 list of electors. There's only 15 people on it. It starts with the Boudry family, Moses, John, and Mrs. John. Then Mr. and Mrs. John Hewitt, William McIver and Ronald McIver. Ronald married a Beauvais girl, Evelyn Ursula. Then there's William Mashke and his wife. They raised the Williams children after their parents drowned in Collins Inlet in 1933. Jimmy Williams married Agnes Rock. Then there's Ernest Noble and his wife. He was a brother to Clarence Noble, who is also on this list with his wife. Alfred Prue was a trapper at Collins Inlet. Adam Wood is recorded as a foreman. I assume his job and many of the laborer occupations on the list were connected to the logging operations. Here's a photo of Pete Boudry with Nick Rock. I think it's the only photo I have with one of the Boudrys in it. Here's the 1940 list for Collins Inlet. Other than the name Godin, I don't recognize the first few people on this list. After them are the McIvers, W.J., Sandy, and Ronald, with their wives. Then Jack Murphy. His wife was Gertrude Burke. They were married the year before this electors list was compiled. The Mashke family is there again. Mr. and Mrs. Ernest Noble, Alfie Prue, and this time John Williams is listed as a foreman. Now let's see the 1935 electors list for Killarney. Killarney Village is on the left side of the map, marked with a red dot. The areas marked in blue, including the township of Rutherford and George Island, some of the unorganized townships around it, and Partridge Island, Center Island, and Badgley Point were included in this electors list. This photo was taken in the late 1920s or early 1930s. For many years, the village had a boardwalk running the length of Channel Street. It was a place to stroll and a gathering spot for those who enjoyed socializing with their neighbors. This photo was taken outside the home of Peter Solomon. The two-story house in the center of this photo is where Dominic Solomon lived with his family. St. Charles Street separated the Solomon home from the two small houses seen further down the street. They belonged to Fred Prue and his mother, Alexandrine Prue. The yellow arrows that I added to this photo are drawing your attention to two poles that have been installed on the street. This photo, taken from George Island, shows the same section of Channel Street. You can see now how the houses are separated by Charles Street, where the yellow arrow is. Today that street is also known as part of the Killarney Highway. The yellow arrows mark the poles along Channel Street that I showed you in the other photo. Those poles carried the lines that allowed telephone communication between the Killarney Hotel and Jackman's General Store. There was no telephone service anywhere else in the village until 1936. I'm showing this list in sections because you probably wouldn't be able to see the names if I tried to show the entire image on the screen. Mrs. Armstrong is number 2 on this list. She came to Killarney as a tourist and ended up living here. She was a widow with a son named Walden, who fought in World War I. But he didn't come home after the war, and she was never notified that he had been killed. So every day for years, she went to the post office to see if there was a letter from Walden. She died not knowing what happened to him. Mrs. Armstrong had kept one of his baby blankets, and after she died, it ended up with my aunt. When the town started a museum in 1967, my aunt donated that blanket. So if you're ever in the Killarney Museum, look for Walden's baby blanket and the story about his mother waiting for him to come home from the war. Lots of other names on this list: Beauvais, Bocage, Bateman, the Mendoshkins, Perros, Pilos, and Prus. Here's the next section. There's the Burke families, the Corbier family. Charles Cook is number 30. It shows that he was a welder. The list includes each man's occupation, but for the women, it usually just records if they are married, widowed, or spinsters. The Egans are also on here, and the Fowlers. The name Gandon is also on this list. Eugene Gandon and Mrs. Gandon, but I think it's supposed to be Godin. It's the Godin family. The Greens are also on here, John and Angela. Tyson Greeno, the Herberts, Heights family, Jackman, etc. Tyson Greeno, number 40 on the list, was a brother of Adelaide, who married Charles Rock, and Irene, who married John Bocage. And in the column on the right are the Prus, the Pitfields, and the Rocks. I don't know who that first man on the left is, but the rest of the men in this photo are Harley Rock, Dan Rock, and Isidore Rock. In the next section, the Lamans who ran the hotel, the Lamondiers, Loosemores, Lowe families, spelled without an E and with an E. The other column shows the rest of the Rocks, and then the Russos, Solomons, John Skelter and his wife, the Sagamaw family. Here's a photo of Pauline Sagamaw with Norbert Loosemore. They were dating at the time, but they didn't end up getting married. Then there's the St. Jean family and the Tysons. It says Bill Tyson is a laborer, Tom Tyson is a fisherman, John is a fire ranger, Percy is a guide, Andrew is a fisherman, and Eddie is a farmer. The Martel family is also on this list. Bill Martel married Victoria Solomon. Here's a photo of their family. Bill with Cyr on his lap, Minnie, Victoria, and Elsier. If you would like to check out these lists a little more closely, I've posted them on my website. And I've also posted electors lists for the 1940s, the 1950s, and the 1960s for Collins Inlet and Killarney, and 2 for the Killarney Quarry. If you'd like to take a look at that web page, there's a link in the description box below this video.